I'm a retired journalist. I spent 40 and a half years at the Tennessean. Started off as a campus correspondent for a month or two started working March 27, 1971. Then I went to work full-time 1st of June, 71. Worked as a journal assignment reporter, and a little later on I started specializing in covering the Tennessee State prison system. And then I covered some politics. I covered the 1974 gubernatorial campaign, spent a few months in Memphis, based there for the paper, covering the campaign. Then I came back in August of '76. I went to Washington. We had before Gannett bought the Tennessean, we had a one-person Washington bureau. So I worked in Washington for about 7.5 months. Got a chance to cover, my main job was to cover the Tennessee congressional delegation. But '76 was a presidential election year, and that was the year Jimmy Carter was elected president. And in January of '77, I got a chance to cover his inauguration. I came back to Nashville. And in 1986, the latter part of '86, I started working the city desk some. And then did that for a while up until 1993. I started writing a column twice a week for the paper, and then joined the editorial board. And then in 2008, I was named to be the editorial page director. And I did that, served as editorial page director and columnist up until I retired in September of 2011. I wanted to be a Major League Baseball player, but I wasn't good enough. Those were my dreams when I was growing up in East Tennessee and Knoxville, a little bit in Strawberry Plains, again back in Knoxville. But in high school, coming along in junior high school, I know in junior high school, maybe it goes back to elementary school, some in my latter years of elementary school. But in junior high school and high school, I would read the newspaper every day. And in high school, I got a chance to write. We didn't have a student newspaper, but again, got a chance to write some for our yearbook. And I would call in the scores of our high school football games and basketball games to the two Knoxville papers, the News Sentinel and the Knoxville Journal, which was the morning paper. The News Sentinel was the afternoon paper. And one year, my senior year, the fall of my senior year, the News Sentinel had a contest, football contest. You pick different winners. But in each, in that particular section, they had one person from each high school in the city to write a column for about 8 weeks about his or her high school. And I was selected by my high school to write the column. And then I came to Tennessee State University, where I played baseball. But I guess my second year there, I started working for the student newspaper. Eventually became the co-editor and then editor of the student newspaper. And so I've been fooling around with it, with journalism, for a long, long time. But I got a chance to meet a lot of different people, to go to a lot of different places. One of the things in writing about the state's prison system, one of, I guess, the proudest moments was to write about it was not proud to write about the overcrowded conditions, but you write about that. I wrote about that, and we had a photographer to go along, and and things got changed. Laws got changed. There was a federal law. It was first a lawsuit filed in state court, and then it went on to federal court. And the state was ordered to, one of the things was ordered to quit housing people in areas not built for human habitation. So you're proud of that. And then a photographer and I, the late Diane Mollum and I, went around the state looking at juveniles being held in adult penal facilities, in county jails. The law said they were supposed to be separated by sight and sound. And in some jails around the state, that wasn't the case. And so we exposed some of that, and so those laws were strengthened.
Can you tell me a little bit more about the prison system, and when did you first get involved in covering?
Well, the fall of 1971, I think 71, 72, we had a fellow named Ken Jost. The Tennessean used to cover pretty much all the parole and executive clemency hearings. And Ken Jost, the paper, he was doing that when I started, but then he was moved to cover the state courts. And I got his job covering the parole board hearings as well as executive clemency hearings. And in doing that, I was lucky enough to build get involved with people who would tell me this is going on in the prison system. You need to take a look at this. And so you build sources, and there were stories that came out of those sources. It's conversations with sources. And so, I got a chance to cover James Earl Ray, the convicted assassin of Martin Luther King. Covered him. I was one of the last journalists to interview him before his death.
Can you tell me a little bit more about that experience, just interviewing James Earl Ray?
Well, one of the things I did, I remember the first time I interviewed him, he was, he wanted an evidentiary hearing, and the U.S. Supreme Court ruled against him. And I went out to the prison to see if he would talk. And he wouldn't talk, but he scratched a note, wrote on a piece of paper, "I have no comment." We ran that on the front of the paper. But then somehow we met and we talked several different times, quite a few times. And he always said that he didn't come out and say, "I didn't shoot Martin Luther King," but he never said I did. But he said one time, "Well, if my fingerprints are on that rifle, I did buy a rifle. If my fingerprints on that rifle that they have, I guess that's mine." And but one of the things he told me toward the end of his life was that if they want a deathbed confession from me, they're not going to get it. He has a brother named Jerry Ray who lives up near McMinnville, Tennessee. And Jerry would ask James Earl Ray, "James, why do you talk to Dwight? Dwight thinks you killed Martin Luther King. Why do you talk to him?" And James Earl Ray told him, "Well, at least he will be fair. At least he's fair. That I would write some of the things that he would say." So, I think that's what you want from a journalist, to be fair. But sometimes it's who gets it first. Who gets it first? And sometimes in the race to get it first, sometimes we don't always get it right. And that should be I had a journalism teacher who taught me, Earl Clanton III, who taught me at Tennessee State. He said, if it's not right, it's wrong. So you want to be right. In addition to getting it first. You would like to have it first, but you want to make sure it's right. Well, one of the things I learned early on is that my former editor, John Siegenthaler, did not serve on any boards. And he urged his staffers not to do that. People ask you to come and serve on the YMCA board maybe, or such and such board. And one of the things you tell them is, maybe I can do you more good by not serving. If I serve on your board, I can't write about you. I can't write about this organization. And so you have to search yourself and make sure that you're being, ethical. So.
Can you tell me a little bit about, you said doing more good. Can you tell me about some of the good that you've done in the community?
Some people might say no good. But once 1972, I guess it was September, October 1972, I was on my way to Knoxville. Well, I was on my way to Johnson City. My wife-to-be worked at Green Valley, facility for the mentally retarded in Greenville, Tennessee, at Green Valley. And she was lived in Johnson City. So I caught the bus up to go visit her. And while the bus had a layover in Knoxville, it was a Trailways bus, while the bus had a layover, I was walking up Gay Street. And covering the state's prison system, there was a fellow named, I forget his first name, they call him, his last name was Fleming. And he came up for parole, was granted a parole, and was given a 3-day furlough to go out and look for a job and to come back. But he didn't come back when he was supposed to have. And I knew this by covering the paroles board. And in Knoxville this particular time, on my way to Johnson City, I was walking up Gay Street, and I happened to look across the street, and coming down the street was the man they called Fat Man Fleming. He was walking down the street, and I watched him go into a tavern off Gay Street. So I walked up the street, and I saw this police officer. And I told him, my name is Dwight Lewis. I'm a reporter for the Tennessean, and there's a prison escapee. I just saw a prison escapee go into a tavern. And he said, how do you know he's an escapee? And I said, well, I work for the Tennessean. And he said, well, if I go arrest that man and he's not an escapee, we both could get in trouble. And so he calls the police department, the headquarters, so they could check and see if Fat Man Fleming was indeed on escape. I go into this florist shop, and I call the paper and have them to check, call back here to Nashville, have them to check with the correction department to see if Fat Man Fleming was still on, to make sure he was still on escape. And come to find out he was. And just a few minutes later, Fat Man Fleming comes up the street, and it ended up, after he got past us, the police officer and I walked across the street, so let's walk up the street, and he radioed up ahead to another officer who stopped him, and he was arrested and brought back to the prison system. So you might say that's one good. Another good, well, I guess it's a good. There was a man named, I forget his name, but he shot his wife's. He and his wife were separated. They were estranged. And one Christmas, near the Williamson-Davidson County line, down off Nolensville Road, he hid and shot his wife's boyfriend. And then, I think around New Year's Eve, he shot her. He had shot her. Police called him a madman on the loose, and they said that he wanted to harm the couple's two sons. And he called the paper and said, a day later, said, I don't want to hurt, I did shoot my wife and I shot her boyfriend, but I don't want to harm my children. I was working the desk that morning, and the reporter, intern who had covered that story initially, was not working that day. And so I told him, I got on the phone with him and told him I'd like to talk to him face to face. And he said, well, how do I know that you won't call the police? And I said, well, I think you can, I've built confidence between the prisoners that I've covered, and I think they would tell you that I would be fair. And they say, then you learn that face to face. I had the information. He told me, yes, I shot my wife and I shot her boyfriend, but I don't want to harm my kids. And that's a story there. But they teach you that face-to-face interviews are better than telephone interviews. So he told me to, well, if you meet me at such and such place down off at the Shoney's off of Nolensville Road, he said, I'll be watching, and I'll watch you when you pull up in your car. And if I make sure that you don't have the police with you, I'll come and talk. So we ended up talking. Well, I bought him some coffee in Shoney's, bought him some little food, bought him some food, and then we went into my car and talked. And then we went back into Shoney's where he had agreed in the car to let me call the paper, and the paper would call the public defender's office, and he was going to turn himself in. But by that time, somebody had called the police. I think somebody from my newspaper, I don't know who it was, but the cops had called the police, and so the police were there too. So I think that might be a good.
Covering these situations, have you ever felt like your life was going to be threatened? Did you ever?
Well, at that particular time, I have a son. My son was in high school at the time, and I had a wife who's now deceased. But I going out there, driving out the interstate, Interstate 65 to Old Hickory Boulevard, and then down to Nolensville Road. He told me, he said, I'm not armed, but here he had shot his wife, his estranged wife, and her boyfriend. So I didn't know whether he was armed or not. And you think, what if he is armed? What if he's, but sometimes you have to be careful, but that wasn't an interview I thought I needed to do. And because going out there, I told my editor, John Sigenthal, and Frank Sutherland, who was coming on to take over for John. John said, well, I said, I'm going to try to get him to turn himself in. And John said, well, what if he doesn't turn himself in? What if he goes out and shoots some other people? How will you feel? And I remember saying, I'm going to give it my best shot. And so I took that chance, and he wasn't armed. And I think I gave it my best shot. I got a chance, one story, in November 1989, they were getting ready to dedicate the Civil Rights Memorial in Montgomery, Alabama. And I did a series of stories, three or four stories leading up to the dedication. I went to Montgomery to cover, but we did 3 or 4 stories leading up to that. One, I interviewed John Siegenthaler, John Lewis, and there's a fellow who lived in Arizona, but they'd all participated in the Freedom Rides. Jim Zwerg. Jim Zwerg was a transfer student at Fisk. He happened to be white. John Lewis is now a congressman. John took part in the Freedom Rides. And Siegenthaler was, at the time, 1960, 61, was working for Robert Kennedy, as Robert Kennedy, Attorney General Kennedy's administrative assistant. And they were all beaten up in Montgomery at the bus station there. So I wrote a story about that. I also wrote a story, the same period of time, same series, did a telephone interview with Mamie Till, who was Emmett Till's mother. Emmett Till was murdered in mid-1950s, 1955 in Mississippi, Money, Mississippi, for whistling at a white woman or saying, "Hey, baby," to a white woman. He was killed. But I also, during that same series, got a chance to interview a daughter of a woman named Viola Louiso. And Viola Louiso was a white woman, 1965, when they were having the Selma to Montgomery marches, the march on to get the Voting Rights Act passed. Viola Louiso saw what was going on TV, there was a beating, March 1st, 1965, across the Edmund Pettus Bridge. And she said she was going to go down, and she went down to help out, to take some of the marches back and forth, and she ended up getting killed. And so I interviewed her daughter about her mother, her particular daughter, and the daughter was telling me what her mother said before she left, and the kid said, "Can we go with you?" And Viola Louiso said, "No, not this time." And that would be the last time that they saw their mother alive. And as I listened to the daughter tell me the story, tears just rolled down my eyes. And so that was one story that I will never forget. To be fair, to listen to both sides. I'm against the death penalty, but I tried to be willing to listen to people who might have favored the death penalty, to put their side in the paper. There's always two sides to a story, so you remember that. That was when I was covering the news. When you're writing opinions, you give your opinion on a specific issue. Again, I want others to let others judge that for the most part. But I think one of the things I've tried to push diversity, try to make sure that people who had no voice, felt they had no voice, were heard. You want everybody should have a place at the table, to make sure that we're doing the right thing, that we think about what we do before we put things in the newspapers, that we get both sides of the story. So those, diversity was one of my main areas that I felt strongly about. Maybe not as much as I should be, but I think I've written about young people, and one of the things I wrote about and I didn't mention is violence, especially black-on-black crime. There's no need for as much crime amongst blacks on black crime. When I was at Tennessee State in 1967 and 68, there were riots in North Nashville, and some people said, "Well, we can go tear up this, tear up that," but most of the time we end up tearing up our own community. And to see young people, not only blacks, but other people. I remember there was a young lady named Elisha Coulihan, who happened to be a young white woman, a teenager, about 16 years old. She was over here on Blakemore at an ATM, Bank of America ATM. Went to pull just a small amount of money out of her account, and she was shot to death by three teenagers. And I will never forget her mother being at her funeral and leaning over and kissing her daughter. You don't forget things like that. You don't forget others, seeing other youngsters in caskets, killed by somebody so unnecessarily. So you're right about that, and you urge people, we got to stop killing each other. We've got to stop killing each other. My greatest contribution? Pushing diversity, like I say, having voices heard that probably would not get heard. You know, sometimes, you know, we don't think to go out into certain areas of town and get those views, listen to those people, you know, the so-called down and out, the underclass. But not only should the rich be heard, but the poor needs to be heard as well. So I think I tried to do that. I went to different places, and that's one of the things. Sometimes you can get on board, say at a newspaper or television station, and you think, well, I have it made now. I can just run with the rich, you know, people who have the haves, and you don't. And I think I did, you know, not only cover the rich, but covered others as well. When I got ready to work the desk, and this is something I will never forget. About 1986, I got ready to work the desk. And there was a woman named Carleen Waller, W-A-L-L-E-R. She was big in local Democratic politics, but she was also the chairwoman of the Metropolitan Development and Housing Agency. And I was at Green Hills Mall one afternoon, and I bumped into Carleen Waller. And she said, I understand that you work in the desk now. That's when you assign stories and edit those stories. She said, I understand you work in the desk now. I said, yes, ma'am. And she told me this, and I've never forgotten it. And this was in 1986, around 1986. Don't forget that there's a real world out there, or out here, or out there. Don't forget there's a real world out there. And what she was telling me is not just to get up in the morning, go to work, assign those stories and edit them, and go back home. But to go out, also to go out into the real world and to interview people, to see what's going on. You have to do that. Otherwise, the world will pass you by. And you're still just assigning certain stories, but you may be missing out on the most important stories. And I have never forgotten that. There's a real world out there. We have to go not only, and I did a journalism fellowship in 1981 at the University of Michigan, a national 81-82 school year, a National Endowment for the Humanities Fellowship for Journalists. And while I was there, one of our speakers, journalism speakers, was a man named Gene Roberts, who was at the time executive editor of the Philadelphia Inquirer. And he spoke to our group, and he said, one of the things he said, a newspaper cannot call itself good if it just covers one area, or one area of town. You got to cover it all. You should cover it all. And so you know, you try to do that. You try to make sure that all voices are heard, that everybody has a place at the table, a seat at the table. Well, things are surely changing. You know, the technology we have, it's a lot different. When I went to the paper in end of March 1971 to start working, you know, I'm so old that we had manual typewriters. You know, manual typewriters, not electric typewriters. We soon got electric typewriters, and then, you know, we got computers. And so, you know, today there's, you know, people tweet and they're on Facebook and all. And so things have surely changed. And a lot of people, I have a 34-year-old son and his wife is 34. They live in Atlanta, and I'll call them and say, well, Dano, we had such and such in the paper. He says, well, yeah, Daddy, I saw it. I read it on the internet. And so, you know, he doesn't take the Tennessean in Atlanta. He lives in Atlanta, but they get on the internet and they read the paper. So, you know, there are different ways we have to change. I'm old-fashioned. Enjoy getting up in the morning, going down my driveway, and picking up the paper and reading it. But, you know, I talked to a former editor of the Tennessean, Mark Silverman, and I was talking. And he says, you know, during the weekdays, a lot of things will be on the internet from a newspaper, but the Sunday paper will probably still will last for a long, long time. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Learn all you can. Meet as many people as you can. Go to different places. And one of the things I tell people, talking to students in the past, is that you have to believe in yourself. Believe in yourself. I had a city editor once said, well, how can you get all these good stories? You went to Tennessee State University. You know, it's not where you come from or what you don't have maybe growing up. If you apply yourself, you can be just as good as anybody else. You always believe in yourself. Don't let anybody tell you that you can't do it. You have to believe, I can do it. You know, the little train that could, the little engine that could. You know, I can do it. You know, I can go get that story. I can ask that question. So you can do it. So just believe in yourself. Learn as much as you can. Read, read, read. So, and be willing to listen, not only to your editors and your colleagues at a newspaper or television station, but be willing to listen to other people. Listen, you know, whether it's a homeless person selling newspapers on the street, or it's the mayor or the governor, you know, mayor of a city or the governor of a state. Be willing to listen to people. Be willing and build sources. And when build your sources, there's a journalist, Reginald Stewart, who grew up in Nashville, worked for the Tennessean, then went to work for Channel 2 now, was Channel 8 then. Then he went to work for the New York Times. Anyway, Reggie, when I started working at the Tennessean, Reggie took me out to lunch. We were the same age, but I fooled around in college, played baseball, and partied too much. But Reggie took me out, and I will never forget it. It was 1971. We went up to Deborah's Casino Royale, a restaurant that was on 40th Avenue North. We ate lunch, and then he said, take out a piece of paper. Let me give you these names. Call them up. Tell them that you're working for the Tennessean now. If they have a story idea, to give it to you or to tell you about it. So you got to build sources. Build sources, build sources, build sources. And you can't build sources by staying at home all the time or staying in the office all the time. You got to get out into the community, the whole community, and build those sources. No, I gave up coaching a while back. My son got a little older, but I still keep up with what youngsters are doing, and I'm writing a column. I'm supposed to be writing twice a month for the Tennessean. And then may teach a course. I'm supposed to be teaching a course this fall at Middle Tennessee State University. And I have some book projects in mind that I want to write. No, I enjoyed my 40 and a half years at the Tennessean. I hate I didn't get to play Major League Baseball. I wish I had been better. But I enjoyed, you enjoy the people that you meet. You know, people that you meet, and there are things that happen, and you meet, and you just, the relationships that you build with different people that will last for a long, long time. And you're just thankful that people opened up to you, and you're thankful that for the chances that the things that you got a chance to cover. You know, it was a world. You know, I had a chance to go to the White House and cover Bill Clinton, sit down and interview him. Same way with Barack Obama. Got a chance to cover Jimmy Carter. And so, Nelson Rockefeller. So they're just people. And even the people who people may not think a lot of, just the small people. The little, like I say, the underclass or the down and out. So I enjoyed that.